Well, it's problematic because philanthropy, especially elite philanthropy, has played this sort of magic trick on us where, most Americans tend to assume that on the whole, charitable giving is almost always a good thing, no matter the source. And so we almost unknowingly tend to lump all philanthropy together. But the reality is that philanthropy can become a powerful tool for preserving and increasing one's political, social, or economic power, most often by simply preserving the status quo. And of course, there are psychological benefits relating to assuaging guilt or seeking status. But the most problematic aspect of philanthropy, in my view, is the way that it can subvert social and political change.
Yeah, so Justin, I agree with the basic core insight there, which I think is so important to put out for everyone to consider, which is that for big philanthropy, people with serious amounts of money, the direction of their private assets towards some public-facing influence is an exercise of power. And in a democratic society, wherever power exists and where it's directed at the public, it deserves our scrutiny, not our gratitude. So the conventional wisdom that citizens should be grateful to big philanthropists for the decision to give their money away rather than keep it for themselves is misplaced, because we're not meant to give as citizens gratitude to people who exercise power over us. There are so many examples of where we can find philanthropy as an exercise of power. We can begin just with the general idea of these legacy foundations, the names of which we all know: the Rockefeller Foundation, the Ford Foundation. These are places where money has been set up to be distributed for global benefits in ways that happens across generations, long past the deaths of the original donors. And when the direction of these private assets goes to some public influence, it raises the problem of hewing to donors' intent and wondering where did the authority come for dead people to make determinations about the use of philanthropic assets today. But even if people have been dead for quite some time, still it's an interesting problem for us to confront as citizens, to ask where the authority comes for people with money to have some public influence. So take, for example, Bill and Melinda Gates. The Gates Foundation does extraordinary work, and especially in the middle of this pandemic, we can point to them for having carried out exceptionally important public work. But I just want to insist upon the idea that when Bill Gates gets an idea about how to change education, and he sets up a whole education funding program, there's nothing that we can do as ordinary citizens to resist his particular education ideas. So some critics have described Bill Gates as the nation's unelected school superintendent, and that's where the nub of the problem rests. Where does Bill Gates or any other rich person get the authority to have ideas about how the public should be shaped and how public policy should go that resists the scrutiny and inquiry of other people?
That's really interesting, Rob. And relatedly, I spent several years studying some of these issues in an actual community, and it was actually the richest community in America, which also happens to have the nation's largest gap between the rich and the poor, and really sees itself as this paradigm of good philanthropy in a community. Oddly enough, I found that environmental conservation, actually, under the banner of philanthropy and protecting nature, that this became an engine for multiplying wealth, for gaining social prestige, for hiding societal patterns of harm, and really protecting the status quo simply by disguising the need for real economic and political change in this community. And more generally, reinforcing many of the social mechanisms that give rise to environmental problems in the first place. At a broader scale, we need to break the myth that a good society is reliant on affluent philanthropy, and the idea, that somehow to question charitable giving is anathema or overly cynical. Elite philanthropy is very good at gaslighting everyday people, effectively manipulating us to think that we're dependent. But continued research, public engagement will help us to break through this veneer And as we do, I really think we'll see more clearly that philanthropy, it can perpetuate many of the problems that it claims to solve.
Yeah, I'd point to two kinds of solutions, although they're not in the kind of silver bullet sense of solving the problem once and for all. They're in the democratic sense of trying to provide forms of scrutiny and inquiry and countervailing power to other centers of power, like philanthropic power in society. So number one is, we need to be aware that there are extraordinarily generous tax subsidies that attach to ordinary as well as elite forms of philanthropy. So I think it's essential to change the way the tax code works that gives exceptionally generous tax breaks, tax incentives to wealthy people to give money away, and therefore leads to the rest of the country subsidizing the practices of big philanthropy. Second, I point to the realm of civil society, in particular journalism, as a place to have some type of, if not resistance, at least the appropriate inquiry. Every major newspaper and magazine in the country has a dedicated set of reporters to investigate public officials and politicians and to hold them to account. They also have daily business pages and business reporters to investigate corporate America and to hold business leaders to account. We have almost no philanthropy beat reporters who try to investigate the various practices and activities of elite philanthropy. And we need hard-hitting investigative journalism rather than press release boosterism about our big philanthropists in order to inform all of us as citizens about the exercise of this power.